I'm not interested.
Alright, well my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Kong Skull Island? Stick around and find out. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the big giant ape guy sleeps tonight. Alright, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com. This is my uncut review of Kong Skull Island. The synopsis on IMDb reads, a diverse team of scientists, soldiers, and adventurers unites to explore a mythical, uncharted island in the Pacific, as dangerous as it is beautiful. Cut off from everything they know, the team ventures into the domain of the mighty Kong, igniting the ultimate battle between man and nature. As their mission of discovery becomes one of survival, they must fight to escape a primal Eden in which humanity does not belong. All right, so let's talk about the story, the script, the pacing. First off, just let me put this out there. I do not really like giant monster movies. I tend to like smaller monster movies like Aliens and Predator and John Carpenter's The Thing, stuff like that. But giant monster movies tend to bore me. They just tend to feel like a natural disaster movie, or maybe, yeah, just because there's these giant things that are either crushing things or burning them like volcanoes and stuff with their beams that they shoot out of their eyes or whatever. Or it's just a giant kind of brawl between two monsters that, you know, I like the smaller monster movies where you can explore the different abilities of the monsters, you know, and there's more hunting and stalking and tracking, and you know, all the different strange abilities that they have tend to come into play more often when it's a more humanoid sized monster movie. So I really love those types, but I typically do not enjoy giant monster movies, so I was not anticipating enjoying this one. But thanks to some of you guys on the Christian Geek Central forums at christiangeekcentral.com, I went into this movie with kind of a different perspective on what makes, for those who like giant monster movies, a good monster movie, you know, and I think some of that allowed me to appreciate this movie more than I might have otherwise. That said, I think even without that, I would have enjoyed this movie, as I did, more than I expected to. It's kind of a pseudo-sequel to the Peter Jackson movie, I think. It takes place about 30 years after the setting of that movie. It's very action and suspense-filled. It also has humor. It has just little touches of character drama, not really heavy stuff, but it's kind of a mashup of a giant monster movie with a Vietnam War movie. And so one of the themes, in fact, one of the main characters, you just get the sense, as you do with Vietnam War movies, of the senselessness of violence. You know, just like, what is the point? You know, the Vietnam War, I think, if I remember correctly in the story, is ending, and there's one commanding officer played by Samuel L. Jackson who's looking at all these medals in this box near the beginning of the movie, and he was like, what was it all for? You know, and so he's searching for some kind of a reason to justify all the hell that he went through, probably in the Vietnam War. It is a jokey movie, but with intermittent quiet moments that show characters, you know, you can tell, reflecting on the psychological stress in the case of both civilians and soldiers. And again, you would expect to see that in a Vietnam War movie, and they just kind of carry over that kind of little bit that to this movie as they're on Skull Island and they've just seen all these crazy monsters. Yeah, some of them in a psychologically unrealistic way that you would expect in a movie like this are just like, man, that was crazy, and da da da, blah, 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 you know. But then there are others that are just like sitting there and they're just like in shock, you know, of what they've just experienced, you know. And so I appreciate that. I mean, I can kind of roll my eyes and shrug and put up with the jokey stuff, but I do tend to like stories that have more psychological realism, or at least a nod to those things, you know, even if they don't go full blown. John C. Reilly's character is kind of comic relief in this movie. I mean, lots of people have little jokey lines, but more than others, I think he's comic relief. But he has a dark madness to his humor as he's written and as he performs that character that sets him apart from the jokiness of the other characters, and I think that fits really well with the infrequent nods to emotional / psychological realism. So, and I found it all the more funny for that reason, you know. As I said, I don't like giant monster movies, but this one I really enjoyed it. You know, it also had small monsters, though, and that was something that I wasn't really expecting a whole lot of. But there was a lot of, there was a wide variety of monsters. I think it's appropriately titled Kong Skull Island because a lot of it, like the Peter Jackson movie, is about the island and about all these weird monsters. Some that are humanoid sized, some that are like maybe as big as a house, and very few that are close to the size of Kong. Most monsters are about half his size, which is still about as big as a 2 or 3 story house or something. It kind of scratched that monster itch for me for the type of monster movies I enjoy, in addition to being like this giant monster movie. And then even though there was like a lot more King Kong in this movie compared to the Peter Jackson movie. I mean, he was in it. There was tons of Kong from beginning to end. So have no fear if you're concerned after the Jackson movie that, like, man, are we going to have to wait another, like, hour before we see King Kong? No, he's in it from pretty much beginning to end in this movie. But there's still a nice focus on the human characters that I really appreciated. So let's talk about the cast a little bit. It's a solid, nearly, I don't want to say nearly all-star, but like half of the faces I definitely recognized or knew by name at least, and I thought that everyone pulled off their roles to exactly the standard that I would want them to for what was being demanded of them, for that type of character, whatever you want to say. I didn't feel like anybody was lacking in bringing about the type of character that I sensed the script was intending to portray. So no Academy Awards here, but I don't have any complaints either. Now, as far as the stunts and visuals, big CG monsters, CG all over the place, lots of tennis balls being looked at by these actors standing in front of green screens and stuff. But there was some practical effects too. Of course, not as much as I'd like, but I'm cursed with an eye that just tends to glaringly see even the best CGI as kind of like a cartoon. So I really like a lot more practical stuff, but they still had more than I might have expected in this movie, more practical effects. There was great monster liquid gore that would splash against people as they finally figured out a way to kill some weird insect thing or whatever. So lots of computer stuff, but the designs of the various monsters were just like nasty. I was like, ugh, man, that is an ugly, nasty, freaky, scary, intimidating looking monster, whatever. So the designs really helped me even when the CG was kind of failing in the experience for me. So I really appreciated that. Now, whenever I kind of watch a movie or play a game or something like that, I try to ask myself, is there anything of worthwhile moral, philosophical, or I can't remember what the other word is that I usually say, but is there anything of like meaningful themes in here that might bring about worthwhile conversation as a result of taking in the experience? And maybe, I don't know, this movie doesn't seem to be going for any kind of heavy-handed messaging, but it does contain arguably some anti-war or anti-violence theming, and I couldn't really tell, that may be more kind of a trope of Vietnam War movies that just kind of ended up in this movie because they're pulling obviously inspiration from Vietnam War movies and kind of the themes and ideas that are in those. So I don't know if that was just kind of naturally came over in the mashup, or if they were intending some kind of an anti-war, anti-violence message. For me, a compelling anti-violence message or anti-war message needs more than black hats who love guns, which is, I felt like, really all this movie had to offer. Very, very little more than that. There was a little bit of question in Samuel L. Jackson's character as I mentioned, opened up that metal box at the beginning and was like, what was this all about? But that was, I felt like, the closest we came to really exploring his motives for kind of being this gun-loving, monster guy who wants to kill, So I would have liked a little more complexity. I think that message of anti-violence or what have you needs to explore the thoughts and the emotions of those black hats so we can identify the true source of unnecessary violence or unnecessary war, rather than being overly simplistic and just, implying subtly that, war bad, violence bad. I just don't find that convincing. I think it'll preach to the choir, as it were, an expression that doesn't really make any sense to me, because in my experience, the choir often needs preaching to. But I don't think it's going to kind of like really make people who, don't connect with anti-violence or anti-war messaging. I don't think it's going to help them see the other side of the issue. I think we've got to get into the emotional and psychological things that motivate unnecessary violence and unnecessary war. So I think this movie kind of falls short in that department, as I think many kind of anti-war, anti-violence message movies do. There may also be a pro-nature message, like save the trees, save wildlife. Maybe not so much save the trees, but save wildlife. The humans, many of them in this movie are portrayed as kind of arrogant and uncaring toward wildlife. So that might be something they're intending to go for. I'm not sure. I can also see a good parallel toward humanity's view of Christ in this movie. Kong is said to be the king of the island by those who live on the island, and that the humans are his guests, and whom he fights to protect while also not tolerating evil on their part. Some humans choose to believe this truth about Kong and ally themselves with him, welcoming his much-needed rescue. Others insist that the Samuel L. Jackson character even says that man is king, and then they seek to eliminate Kong from their lives. I think that whether as Christians or non-Christians, we face this same choice every day regarding Jesus. Will we choose to acknowledge him as king and rescuer, trusting him and living in his world under his authority? Or will we kind of arrogantly choose to believe that we are the king of our own lives, not needing any rescue, and try then to snuff out his influence and authority over us? So I think I don't think those parallels are intended by any means. I'd be a little surprised if they were, but I guess it's possible. But I did see that parallel that could potentially be drawn out of the story of this movie. Anyway, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, hey, Pater, you're going to enjoy this movie more than you thought you would. And as is the case with many movies, it's not one that you need to see in theaters. It's pricey to go see movies in the theater. But Redbox this one, absolutely, because it's going to be a really good experience for you. This one's rated PG-13 for intense sequences of sci-fi violence and action, and for brief, strong language. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Go over to spiritblade.com to check out our audio dramas and our weekly podcast there. And then I'd love it if you came over to christiangeekcentral.com and join us there as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.
I'm not interested.